Hello, I'm Blaze, and welcome back to Warframe. The new Syndicate weapons have two real stars in my opinion. One was the Recta Cernos, the other is this one. Let's take a look at the new Synoid Simulor, and compare it to the earlier base Simulor. Special thanks to our favourite Cephalon Quietshai for this one, as she actually gave me both the Synoid Simulor and the Telos Boltor for free. And also being patient enough to do the trade a second time because I didn't realise I had no free weapon slots the first time. The Synoid Simulor is a custom Simulor provided by Cephalon Suda and comes along with a Suda-themed patterning similar to the Synoid Gamma Core. As you can expect, being a Cephalon Suda weapon, you can get it from her at the Genius level for 125,000 standing, provided you meet the hefty mastery rank requirement of 12. Alternatively, if you've left her judging you as a specimen of wasted life, you can instead try heading up the trade chat. However, if you are trading for it, keep in mind that, like other tradable weapons, you must still meet the mastery rank requirement, and the Synoid Simulor in question must be completely unranked, with no catalyst or formas installed. The Synoid Simulor has received a lot of tweaks at Suda's hands, improving it compared to the base Simulor across the board, some ways far more dramatic than others. Most of the on-paper stats seem like minor tweaks, with the damage spread actually being narrowed. The Synoid Simulor has a minimum stack damage of 175 magnetic damage, which is 5 points higher than the base Simulor, but a lowered maximum stack damage of 225 magnetic damage compared to the Simulor's 230. Kind of a wash in this case, since I haven't really noticed any major impact on the actual damage done. The rest of the damage stats are the same, with both the Simulor and Synoid Simulor having a 10% critical chance, a 2 times critical damage multiplier, and a 10% status chance. Nothing especially standing out on any of those points, as none are really high enough to warrant focusing on. But this is where things start getting interesting. The Synoid Simulor has a magazine capacity of 15, up from 10 compared to the Simulor, and also cuts down the reload time for the original's rather painful 3 seconds down to a far more manageable 2 seconds, which is a pretty big usability improvement in itself. It is also worth noting in both cases that they have a reserve ammo pool of 100, which is actually fed with rifle ammo drops, so you are fairly unlikely to have ammunition shortage problems. Along with this, it comes with a faster fire rate at 2.67 rounds per second, compared to the base Simulor's 2.0 rounds per second, allowing you to lay down damage significantly faster. Those are all the stats apparent on the arsenal screen, and they are substantial enough improvements, but it also completely misses 3 additional factors. One is that the threshold for creating a vortex has been lowered from needing 5 orbs down to just 4, allowing the Synoid Simulor to reach its maximum damage threshold more quickly. For those who don't know, this was one of the main functions of the Simulor. After adding up orbs past that threshold, it creates a vortex that pulls in items and does minor damage over time to enemies that happen to be in range. The second is that orbs are launched at a slightly higher velocity compared to the base Simulor, granting an extended effective range. And the final change is by far the greatest. The original Simulor wasn't otherwise that bad, but it was clunky and it had an extremely limited range, which greatly hurt its usability. The Synoid Simulor has addressed that, and now the blast radius for each merge has been increased substantially. Neither the Synoid Simulor nor the Simulor can use Firestorm, but now the Synoid Simulor doesn't really need to, and it is able to rapidly dish out wide area damage. The Synoid Simulor also comes along with 3 polarities. One V polarity which is added on, as well as a D polarity and a dash polarity. Naturally, I recommend getting rid of that D polarity as soon as possible, but both the V and dash polarities are useful for builds in general. We aren't finished with explosions yet though. The Simulors also have a secondary fire that allows you to detonate all orbs at will, which deals a guaranteed electrical status effect as well as further damage. But the range of this effect is quite limited, having what seems to be a very tiny blast radius, so personally I don't find this terribly useful. And finally, like other Syndicate weapons, the Synoid Simulor comes along with the entropy effect built in. While the Synoid Simulor is equipped, entropy charges as the weapon gains affinity, visible via the Cephalon Suda insignia beside the ammo counter. When the gauge fills, the weapon discharges, dealing 1000 magnetic damage to all in-range enemies, along with a guaranteed magnetic status effect cutting their shields in half for the duration. Which I will admit is a pretty weak sauce effect, but that's what magnetic status effects do. grants your Warframe an energy recharge of 25% of the Warframe's base energy value, and giving your Warframe a 25% boost to your Warframe's base energy maximum for 30 seconds. After discharging, the weapon will enter a short cooldown period during which the entropy effect cannot be charged again. The Simulors both tried to do a lot, and while the first iteration ended up falling flat, Suda's done some fine work on Samaris' creation, and it is now a pretty major powerhouse. It does suffer somewhat against heavily armoured targets, as it can't reliably throw in corrosive status procs to strip armour away, but as part of a full team of corrosive projection auras, or against less armoured opponents, it can continue to tear everything apart. Not to mention, both Entropy and Blight are what I feel as being some of the more useful syndicate effects thanks to the energy restore, which pretty much every Warframe can benefit from. Modding the Synoid Simulor is actually reasonably straightforward, as there isn't a lot to play with in terms of status or critical chances. I will, however, specifically recommend Shred. The fire rate bump will improve this handling, but the most important aspect is the punch-through. The Simulor projectiles are physical objects that are reasonably large and do not do damage on their own. All damage the Simulor does will largely come from when the orbs merge together. So they can end up bouncing off enemies or the terrain in close quarters and go in some weird direction. Adding punch through will allow them to ignore some of that and carry on straight ahead. So instead of, say, bouncing off a guy in front of you, they'll carry on and merge together on the other side to deal their damage. Additionally, Split Chamber has the interesting effect of causing the orbs to be fired pre-merged. This doesn't really provide any immediate damage, but it does bump up the stack damage to begin with, and it can allow them to form a vortex in as little as 2 shots, so it's a useful inclusion. Finally, Heavy Caliber does literally nothing to the Simulors in terms of downsides, so go ahead and throw that on for even better explosions. So that is pretty much the general overview of the Synoid Simulor. The Simulors are fucking weird, but I can absolutely appreciate the idea behind them. Rather than shooting directly at your enemies to deal immediate damage, what you're doing is creating a small singularity type thing that causes damage with each additional set of particles you add to it. So your source of damage comes from a secondary object you create rather than you directly. It takes a little bit of getting used to. Sadly, the original Simulor just didn't perform well enough for it to be remotely worth it. But the Synoid Simulor's increased damage radius alone fixes pretty much all of the major problems with that. There is actually even more too, depending on if you're using some other frames. Zephyr's jet stream augment will make the spheres launch significantly further, for example. But I honestly can't recommend that, as I feel like it ends up being really hard to place the singularities where you want them. This is kind of a close range oriented weapon. On the other hand, we have Mirage, where her Hall of Mirrors doubles projectiles will also merge in with everything. This can cause the flight path to become unpredictable, as the attraction between the spheres can end up pulling the collective mass in some odd direction, but it does allow a large number of blasts to be thrown out in a short space of time. So for sheer damage output, Mirage works well. Slightly less dramatic is Nova. You can actually very easily use the damage of the Synoid Simulor to power up the damage of her antimatter drop in a very short space of time. And since the Synoid Simulor does flat damage rather than relying on crits, it's also quite consistent. Not to mention, I find it pretty fitting how a particle singularity gun thing synergizes easily with the Warframe that controls particles of antimatter. Also as a little bonus, as the spheres count as physical objects, they will cause bombard missiles to explode if you can angle them for a direct hit. It's of limited use admittedly, but it's something that can be done, so do with that knowledge what you will. There may be other frame synergies, but those are the 3 clearest ones I could think of at the time. The Simulors represent a true area denial type weapon, and excel at locking an area down through rapid and reasonably wide area effect damage. And while I find the damage output of the Vortex stage quite underwhelming, it is a nice way to gather up the occasional item. Plus, the Synoid Simulor singularities have little Cephalon pseudo-emblems in them, and the new makeover makes the Synoid Simulor much more eye-catching than the comparatively forgettable Simulor. The Synoid Simulor definitely takes some getting used to, but it does what it does very well, and it's everything that the original Simulor should have been. And in that light, I would at least like to see the original Simulor's blast radius increased, as once again the tiny blast radius is really the thing that built the original's coffin. But for the Synoid Simulor, I think that it's most certainly worthy of a place in anyone's arsenal. Thank you for watching my look at the Synoid Simulor. All comments are appreciated, and I hope to see you around next time. For more content, you can give a click down below to go watch my video of the Rakta or my look at the Twin Grakatas. And as always, good luck, have fun, and take care.